We're going to go over to Dan now for a quick introduction about monkeypox. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Dan Clutterbuck. I'm a GU Medicine and HIV consultant working at the Chalmers Centre in Lothian. My pronouns are he and him. I've got no conflicts of interest in with regard to monkeypox, and I've got some slides. I think the first thing to say is I think quite a lot of what I will say will be familiar to some of you. Possibly there'll be something new. I will be keeping it basic, but if I do slip into medical terminology, as Mark said, there's no such thing as a stupid question. Please put in the Q&A if I've used something that is impenetrable. If that's the case, it's unintentional and we need to come back and explain it. So I'm still waiting for some slides, but great. Lewis is moving on slides. So we're on the real basics. So what is monkeypox? Next slide. So what it is, it's a virus which is related. It's in the same group as chickenpox, which I suspect everyone's familiar, and smallpox, which was eradicated in 1980. We stopped vaccinating people in the 1970s. So it was first discovered in some macaques, some research animals in the 50s, but it was first described in Africa in the 70s, in West Africa in the DRC, and there are two parts of Africa, a central part in Nigeria, where two different sorts of monkeypox are what's called endemic. So we're used to seeing outbreaks of say 20 to 80 or 90 cases, and it's something that jumps from wildlife to man. Everyone's getting more familiar with that idea. It happened with HIV in the 1920s, and of course it happened with COVID in the more recent past. It looks like, although it's not absolutely clear, that it's mostly in rodents, and we're used to this infection being seen in West Africa and seeing literally the odd case in places like the UK associated with travel. There have been some outbreaks. It linked with animals. It got into a prairie dog population in the United States, and there were some cases in the US earlier in the century, but we've not seen masses of it. Next slide. So as a result, we didn't know all that much about it, but thinking about how it's transmitted, it's skin-to-skin contact and droplets. It's not absolutely conclusive, but there's a lot of evidence to suggest it isn't airborne. Now, there were loads of questions about this that some of you no doubt be familiar with. We discussed it at length about COVID, but I think we can be pretty confident that it is not airborne, but there is some droplet spread. We call it a sexually transmissible infection, so it's not only through sexual contact, but often the skin-to-skin contacts involves some sexual contact. We see loads of monkeypox DNA when people are inpatients, when they're looked after in hospital, on all the hard surfaces in the bedding, and it's really, really resistant. It's resistant to drying out, and it lives a long time, but slightly surprisingly, with very little evidence of accidental spread. So very little evidence of spread through social contact, very little evidence of spread through medical care, no cases of somebody acquiring it through caring for somebody with monkeypox in this outbreak. We've got one confirmed, just very recently published, I only became aware of it this morning, case of someone transmitting monkeypox to a pet dog. New slide. So who's affected? Again, it may not be a surprise that the majority of recent cases has been very well publicised, affecting a population of gay, bisexual, and other men who have sex with men. In particular, we see that people who've had monkeypox are more likely to report having multiple partners, having group sex, using sex on premises venues or saunas or sex parties, and they seem to be much more likely to be affected. We are seeing gay and bisexual men who don't report these behaviours presenting with monkeypox. In some cases where there isn't an explanation, we're seeing much fewer cases in men who don't report same-sex behaviour and in cis and trans women. In fact, there's only been about 30 cases in women in the UK reported. New slide. So what happens? Well, The incubation time, so the time between contact and symptoms, is usually about 12 days. The spread's shown there. Most people feel what we call malaise. The posh word is malaise. We all know it as feeling a bit shit. About 60% of people get fever. Some people get muscle ache and joint pain. It's fairly common to get enlarged lymph nodes, particularly if it's been sexually transmitted in the groins. But nearly everybody gets rash. Really importantly, and what we've found in this episode, is about a third of GBMSM with monkeypox get some inflammation of the anus and rectum, so maybe some discharge and significant pain, and about 10%, that's what they present with. Nearly everybody manages to manage their monkeypox at home without any specific treatment, although about 10% of people are admitted. Next slide. This is a picture of the skin lesions. There are many more graphic pictures of skin lesions out there. Next slide. Don't need to go into detail, but the most important thing, next slide, to say about this, next slide, about the rash is, compared to chickenpox, monkeypox rash tends to spread, tends to be what's called centrifugal, so on the face and the palms, rather than chickenpox, which tends to be on the trunk. Next slide. And when very recently a group of clinicians and scientists looked at 500 cases, they were seeing rash around the anus, on the body, less commonly on the face and the palms and soles. The number of lesions is really variable. Many people have 5 or 10, but a small proportion of people have hundreds. A few people, about 10%, got a single ulcer, and that sometimes has led to some problems with diagnosis, because it can easily be confused with another STI, for example, syphilis. A lot of people get lesions in the mouth and around their anus. Next slide. If you do want to find out more and look at slides to make you feel uncomfortable, showing pictures of people's lesions, those are the two most recent papers with the pictures. They're all open access. I've put the easiest way to find them by Googling those simple phrases, so you don't need to use the links. And just to note, I'm not sponsored, so other search engines are available. Next slide. So we'll go into this in a bit more detail, but the main things to know is, if you're diagnosed with monkeypox, you're advised to isolate at home. A few people need admission. That's not usually because they're in danger, but it's usually because they've got pain, often rectal pain, or in guys swelling of the penis. A small number, and I really do mean a small number, have had infection affecting the brain, the lungs, or their eyes. There are specific antiretrovirals, but these are only given in a few cases, and there are trials planned and underway to look at whether to give those more routinely. It's really important to say that about 40% of people so far affected in the UK have been people living with HIV, and certainly for people living with HIV who are on treatment, there is little or no evidence that the course is any different. That's not absolutely conclusive, but it is looking like there is not a very significant difference. And perhaps important to note that people have to isolate until all the exposed skin lesions have healed and the scabs have fallen off, and that's because the scabs contain quite a bit of monkeypox virus. I'll leave it there and let colleagues, I think Colin's first, take over and add further information. Thanks.